us this week, it wasn't a permanent home, but a place where people came for a few days or a few weeks. Over time, the Adena tribe, the Hopewell, the Monongahela, the Lenape, Shawnee, Iroquois, and the Seneca all came through here as they were forced off their native lands. As we gather here this week, we honor and remember those who came before us to this place. Let us be inspired by these rivers and the resources that have drawn people here over time, and be empowered and connected with one another. Join me in working to include all marginalized people and historically excluded groups, especially Indigenous people, past, present, and future, in our work. Can you believe that it has been 2.5 years, 30 months since the Esip community last gathered together in person? It blows my mind that this is my third Esip summer meeting, and yet I'm still just meeting so many of you for the first time in person. So if this is your 49th Esip meeting or your first Esip meeting, welcome. I can definitely feel the energy in the room and in the hallway and in all the conversations that are happening. There is a lot of excitement to be together again. In addition to Esip's core federal support from NASA, NOAA, and USGS, I want to thank our meeting sponsors, AWS, Esri, and Element 84. Registration costs and federal support alone do not cover all of our meeting costs. Sponsorship support is essential to bring you meetings like this and to Esip's sustainability. Their support allows us to come together. Core to Esip is people, community. This is immediately apparent even in an online Zoom world. Esip brings people together, bridges divides, collaborates across domains and sectors to solve the most pressing challenges of data management. Throughout the year, each of us resides in our own agencies, our own organizations, offices, maybe even our own basements, but we come together at Esip, either on a monthly video call or at meetings like this, to connect with one another, to be enriched and inspired by others. In this room, and those of you online, we have amazing people whose expertise spans dozens of scientific domains and technical fields. For most of the year, we work in our own organizations with our own teams and on our own priorities. But for the next 4 days, we are here together. This is the magic of Esip, the blending of our experiences and perspectives to forge truly meaningful and transformative solutions. The theme of our meeting this week is data for all people. At Esip, we know through the sound creation, use, and management of data, we can work for meaningful understanding and positive change for all in our world. We know that connecting people with data, we can enable and empower action on some of the world's greatest challenges. For over 2 years, we have poured our energy into cameras and computer screens. Today, we get to reignite those connections in person, reconnecting with old colleagues, meeting some in person for the first time ever, and welcoming the 27 new Esip partner organizations who, for them, this is their first in-person Esip meeting, along with over 100 first-time meeting attendees, both in person and online. As we gather over the next 4 days in this city of bridges, I challenge each of you to build bridges and walk across them. We have a great week in store for you, starting with today's opening plenary and evening welcome reception. Wednesday, we have Workshop Wednesday with longer sessions, allowing a deeper dive, and our evening research showcase poster and demo sessions. Thursday, we are excited to bring back our unconference, where you can propose topics on the spot and carve out time for our most emerging challenges and opportunities. And Friday, we bring you Funding Friday, our innovation and ideation space where you and your colleagues can dream up new ideas and compete for seed funding. There is a lot to take in, but pace yourself. We know that the return to in-person meetings is not easy, especially if this is your first in-person meeting in a while. We have intentionally designed networking opportunities into the agenda with longer coffee breaks and an hour-and-a-half lunch each day, even for those of you online. Please feel free to take coffee or lunch outside and into the park across the street or up to your room if that's where you are most comfortable. And respect that each person's comfort level is different. At Esip, behavior expectations are supported by our community participation guidelines. Be respectful and inclusive. Understand different perspectives. Accommodate differences and lead by example. This covers professional dialogue and differences of opinion. It also covers our personal behavior, and especially the complicated decision about whether or not to wear a mask this week. It is the way we treat each other that sets Esip apart. So I ask you to please keep these values at the forefront this week. Should you encounter behavior that runs counter to our community participation guidelines, please contact a member of the Esip staff or a board member immediately. Esip's elected board plays a large role in shaping who we are as an organization. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Ken Casey, Esip's president.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ken Casey, and it is my great honor and my great privilege to serve as Esip's president. I am incredibly thrilled to be here with you and everyone out there online, but to be frank, I'm also a little bit nervous. This is the first time I've spoken in front of a live crowd in years, maybe 3 years now, so I hope the rust doesn't show too badly. But I take a little bit of comfort in the idea that I'm probably not alone in this, so I do want to run a little bit of a test here. So if this is your first in-person meeting since the pandemic began, please go ahead and stand up. Let's take a look. First time. All right, big crowd. All right. All right, go ahead, have a seat. Thank you. Now, since it's been nearly 3 years, I'm also wondering, particularly for our early career colleagues, if this is any of your first in-person meeting ever. Any first person? Go ahead and stand up if this is your first in-person meeting ever. Yes, there are a few. Congratulations, you picked a good one to make your first one. All right, one more here. So if you've been working remotely with folks but have never met them in person yet, and this is your first chance to do that, to meet them in person, go ahead and stand up. Let's see that. Oh yeah, a lot of folks standing up there. Excellent, thank you very much. Go ahead and have your seats. Folks online, I haven't forgotten you, so I want you all to now stand up as well. I know some of you are at a stand-up desk already, so you can go ahead and bend over and touch your toes. All right, so I think as you can all see, this is really going to be a meeting of firsts for a lot of us, basically all of us. So I hope we can all extend each other and ourselves a little bit of grace as we shake off that rust and as we move through this week and we deal with the awkward moments that are surely going to arise. And especially, as Susan just noted, I really want you to always remember the community participation guidelines and be respectful and inclusive in every interaction you have. And on that note, it's really thrilling to be able to highlight our new Equity, Diversion, Inclusion, and Justice Advisory Committee. They're just getting started. They really need your inputs. So if you're interested in getting involved, please make sure to reach out to the co-chairs, Nancy Ritchie and Bruce Wilson, or any of the other members of the committee or the Esip staff. They can all help you get involved. So now that we've gotten our morning exercises out of the way, I do want to take a few moments to reflect on the opportunity that's in front of us this week. And that opportunity is to go out there and connect with your colleagues, to teach and to learn, and to find better paths forward in reaching that goal of data for all people. So whether you're here in person or joining online, I really want you to seize this opportunity and make the most of it. So block off your calendars, turn on the autoresponders, tell your bosses you can't deal with their meaningless spreadsheet today because you're busy making the world a better place this week. So do it. Minimize those distractions and get yourselves in the arena. We don't need you out in the bleachers just watching. We need you down on the field, on the court, on the rink, whatever your favorite sport metaphor is there. We need you down on the field participating. If the state of the world is teaching us anything, it's that we really must be urgent in our efforts to make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We must waste no time in building more trustworthy digital repositories, following CARE principles for Indigenous data governance, and doing all that we can, each and every one of us here, to ensure that environmental data are usable by anyone, anywhere, at any time. And so until we can mark that off as done on our to-do list, we can't rest. So let's get busy. So one more thing before I hand the microphone back over to Susan, I do want to take this opportunity to thank the Esip staff. Allison, Annie, Lindsay, Megan, Patty, and of course Susan. They've all been working incredibly hard behind the scenes to make this the best Esip meeting yet. It takes months of work behind the scenes to pull off a meeting like this, and more generally to keep the Esip community up and running and to support it in doing all of the amazing work that it does. So I'd like to give them a really big shout out. And I also want to thank the Esip fellows. Are there any of the fellows here in the room? Can you go ahead and stand up? Yeah, let's give them a big thanks. And they're working hand in hand with the Esip staff to really make this machine run smoothly. So let's just give the staff and the fellows a big round of applause. Thank you. So with that, let's seize the opportunity in front of us, have a fantastic meeting, and let's get busy making this world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So in closing, look around you. Whether this is your first Esip meeting or your 49th, we want you to find your people here. People who are committed to the power of data to transform our world. At a time with so much chaos and hurt and distrust in our world, when was the last time you were gathered with over 300 people who are all working to make a positive difference? Just think of the impact that we can have together. Use this week to be recharged and invigorated in your work and believe in the difference we can all make. This week, as we gather in the City of Bridges to work to make data for all people a reality, I challenge you to bridge the past, the present, and the future. Bridge domains and agencies, bridge cultural barriers and information gaps, build and rebuild the connections that empower our work as a community, and build a better and more just and sustainable world. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce our opening plenary speakers, starting with Dr. Rebecca Nugent, affectionately referred to as the Dean of Data. Officially, she is the Associate Head and Co-Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Carnegie Mellon Statistics and Data Science Department. She recently served on the National Academy of Sciences Study for Envisioning the Data Science Discipline. She is the founding director of the Statistics and Data Science Corporate Capstone Program, an experiential learning initiative that matches groups of faculty and students with data science problems in industry, nonprofits, and government organizations. Kind of sounds like Esip. I am really excited to welcome her to the Esip community. After Rebecca, we will be pleased to hear from Amin Ra Mizraki. Amin is a fellow with the Bezos Earth Fund, working to identify strategies and solutions that will help environmental justice organizations to use data to solve complex issues. Bezos Fund, through their $10 billion in investments over the next 10 years, are working to combat climate change and protect nature. I am excited to hear and have him share how they are leveraging data as a part of these investments, and I know that the Esip community can inform and help shape this very important work. With that, I will turn it over to Rebecca.
Green button, use it for it. Yep. All right, great. Well, good morning, and welcome to Pittsburgh. What's up? What's up? What's up? I'm just waiting for the slides to load here. Everyone's just staring. And hello. It's not, there's nothing changing. So I don't see what you guys see. So we're gonna go over Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. And I honestly was very inspired by those introduction remarks by both Susan and Ken. So it's really exciting to come visit an organization that is so interested in changing the world and making the world a better place and doing it through data. That's something that we believe in quite wholeheartedly at Carnegie Mellon and in the Pittsburgh data community. So it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to Pittsburgh. Don't just hang out in the Wyndham Grand. Make sure that you get out and about into the downtown. Check out all of our music and our culture down here. It's all walkable. Hit some of the sports across the river. You did just miss Picklesburg. I am sorry about that. So that means you missed the drinking pickle juice competitions. So you're probably better off for that. But this morning we're going to talk a little bit about democratizing data, and is everyone a data scientist? So when I got the invitation to come speak, they were asking what kinds of things are happening in data science education. When you think about data for all people, what's happening on the education side of things? And I was really pleased to hear that Esip was coming to Pittsburgh, because if data science were a country, Pittsburgh would be the capital. So this is me being flippant at a Women in Data Science conference a few years ago. Carnegie Mellon has a very large presence in the Global Women in Data Science Initiative. If you are not familiar with that, please just Google WIDS and you'll find local meetings in your hometown areas. But I flippantly said if data science were a country, Pittsburgh would be the capital, given all of the different innovation hubs and all of the different companies and organizations and universities that are around in the Pittsburgh area using data science, AI, and ML to make decisions, to collect, curate, and manage data and use it to make data-informed decisions for the world around us. So who am I actually, though? What do I actually do? So this is me teaching statistics to the penguins in Antarctica. And when I'm not traveling, when I'm at home here at Carnegie Mellon, I have a few different major projects in my portfolio. So a couple of them you heard about. One is data science experiential learning. Carnegie Mellon has a strong commitment to the idea of engaging in real-world data science problems. And when I say data science, I'm really referring broadly to the phrase AI, ML, data, anything that's data related. That's what we're referring to when I'm saying this loosely for data science. And what we do is we, every single semester and in the summer, all year round, we engage in really rich partnerships with for-profit, nonprofit, government agencies, NGOs, et cetera, on real world problems. So we bring them into the classroom, students and faculty work on your problems with you, kind of providing outside of the box solutions, et cetera. I also do quite a bit of work with the National Academy of Sciences on trying to figure out how data science can be incorporated into training programs, the physical and life sciences. And we just finished a large study on how to upskill data training for the Department of Defense. On the research side, though, I'd like to ask everyone to think a little bit about the idea of the science of data science. So we create data products and we teach people how to do data science, but why and how are they doing it? So I'm talking about doing research on the process of data science. What's the optimal way to do that? How can we collaborate as a group? What skill sets do we need? Who should we be assigning the individual jobs? What's the best way to use data to solve a problem? This is a rapidly growing research field, and there's lots of really interesting tools and methods that are being developed in order to tackle that. Okay, so what are we learning? What kinds of things are we doing as we're trying to make sure that data are being used, or be available for all people? So one of the questions I often get asked is, okay, so what is data science? Sometimes I'm asked at the C level, so I won't use names, but the CEO of an incredibly large company was like, so what is this data science? Like, I know I need it, but like, I don't know what it is, and can you explain it to me? And this, what you're looking at on the screen, is what my mother thinks I do for a living. Yeah, so my mother is a retired middle school teacher, and she does English, Latin, language arts, et cetera, and she genuinely believes that like I live in data, like I am Tony Stark in my way through life, you know, throwing things up in the air and expanding them and like flying around in robot suits. And I don't dissuade her of that opinion because it's good for our relationship. But I always tell her that I prefer to think of myself as in control of the data, right? Like I am being powerful and strong and using the data to solve problems. So that's me though. I'm super excited about data. Like I see stuff like this and I get super jazzed and I want to be Trinity, right? Like I want to be in the Matrix. But that's not the way the rest of the world actually thinks about data. We tend to be in these very siloed communities surrounded by people who have the same kinds of skill sets and tools and love for data and AI and ML as we do. But most people don't. And then when they start looking around at things like this, they start getting extremely intimidated. So imagine, for example, if you wanted to start thinking about data, you wanted to join that community, you wanted to get some extra training, maybe do a degree, a certificate, a course or something in data science, and you just Google, all right, let's learn data science, what do I need? This is the kind of image that comes up. Now for some people, and it's very, very tiny, but it's showing you all of the different platforms and landscape tools that you might use in order to solve problems with data. So this can be exciting for some people, but it also can be terrifying. If you think you need to master all of these programming languages and all of these tools in order to participate in using data and working with data, billions of people on this planet opt out. This is scary, all right? So we have to think about a way that we can communicate what is data, how can you interact with data without necessarily being kind of the most technical person in the room. That's the kind of stuff we spend a lot of time on. So when I'm thinking about, I'm not going to walk through this slide, and I've been informed that the slides are going to be available for the posted at the end of the conference. So please do feel free to look at the slides in more detail then. But we use, people hear all these words that they get used interchangeably. Like they talk about statistics and data analytics, and then I go to another company and they use machine learning to describe logistic regression, which has legit been around 100 years. Do you know what I mean? And then they're like, no, I am learning deep. I am learning so deep. And I'm like, what are you actually doing? And they're like, I don't know, but I got 30 observations and I'm gonna go deep. I'm like, what? You know, so somehow we've gotten this idea, right? We're just gonna throw AI and deep learning on everything when really, we want to think about solving real world problems by extracting value from data. And that's kind of loosely what we're thinking about data science. So when they ask us in education, please train people to go work with all of you, right? And start their careers in data science. And they tell us, here's what I need from you. I need them to be masters at computer science. I need them to know everything about math and statistics. And then it would really help if they knew everything in earth science. And we're like, yeah, okay. So that would be a 20-year degree, but that's okay, sure, we'll do it in 4. So this was one of the joke graphs that came out, these Venn diagrams several years ago, about the idea that one person is going to solve all of your data science problems is essentially, you know, comical. This is a mythical unicorn. No one is ever going to have all of the skill set. So we turn it much more into like the idea of a workflow, thinking about data science and workflow. And this is what we explain to a lot of our students and the people who we are upskilling or retraining to be in data-focused roles. And where people like to think about data science, and I don't believe I do not have a red, like a pointer here, because the screens are in front. But if you guys would look in the middle of this section with me, do you guys see data acquisition, understanding, and modeling? When most people think about data science or think about AI, ML, they think a lot about those sections. I'm going to acquire data, I'm going to build an infrastructure, I'm going to model it, et cetera. I'm going to curate and manage the data, I'm going to figure out what model and algorithm I need to use. But they leave off the other two. So the business question, and you can replace that with research question if that's the world that you're living in. This is a diagram from Microsoft Azure, so they have business understanding. And then deployment and acceptance down at the bottom. These are the areas in which we are really lacking training. So most of the young people that come into our programs, and we have some of the top ranked programs in the world, they really want to sit in a room and they want to code, and they just want to code, and they want to code. And we've started changing our programs such that we don't even give them data at the beginning of the problem. We make them think about and talk about what the research question is without any data. Like we actually give them paper, you know, and we're like, write things on it. And they're like, what is this writing that you are speaking of? Like, what is this? But what we've learned is that we're not spending enough time thinking about the questions and thinking about how to get people to understand our results and understand our data. So thinking about that acceptance at the end, I can build a fantastic deep learning framework that works extremely well, visualizes the results, finds all of the signal inside that data set. But if nobody understands what I'm doing, then they're not going to adopt my ideas. They're not going to use the data sets that you've created. They're not going to use it to make decisions in their own lives. So spending more time at the beginning and the end where we see data science education moving in order to make sure that we are getting access for data to everybody, that everybody is able to leverage data. So this slide, and again, the slides are going to be posted. I want to stay on time. So we are asking a few different questions in those spots, but I want to show you that we have 6 different roles in this data life cycle. So my understanding of this audience is that they tend to be very technical, which is fabulous, but there are 6 different roles, according to the National Academies, in the data life cycle. The top 3 in this chart, data engineer, data scientist, data analyst, have more technical training, but the larger groups, and in some ways the more impactful groups, are data users, domain experts, and the leaders and decision makers. If you are not improving data literacy and the understanding of the value of data across all roles in your organization, you're not going to be able to move forward as much as you'd like. So when we think about pulling groups of people together, we think about when you first start at that business understanding or the research question, you really need the data scientists there, but you also really need the domain experts. They need to explain to you what's going on. You need to be thinking about who's going to use the data after I do all of this process, and making sure that you have the leaders and the decision makers buying in on what you're doing. Because I don't know what everyone's organizational infrastructure here is, but I imagine you don't have enough resources. Yes? Is that accurate? I also do not have enough resources. So what we really need is we need the decision makers to understand the value of what we're doing and to integrate our work throughout an organization so that we can get more resources. We can get more eyes on the types of things we're doing. And then you'll look down in the bottom category for deployment. And again, we're seeing that the domain experts, the data users, the decision makers are key at that last section. If we do not involve everybody in these conversations, we're not going to be able to solve our problems in the most effective way. So I kind of laugh at this because I like this graph because it shows these 4 phases very nicely, but I always think to myself, like, if you really work with data, like if you really, like you're in it, like you know the hell and like the joy, I kind of think of it as more like this, like the ultimate choose your own adventure book. And so apologies for those who may not, I think they're being reissued, but choose your own adventure book is like, so you land somewhere on the beach and a rainstorm starts. And so your choices are, if you want to go into the cave, go to page 6. If you want to go into the jungle, go to page 12. And you're like, okay, I'll go in the cave. And you hit page 6, and it's like, there's a bear in the cave, you are dead. And you're like, my bad. And so you go back to the beach, right? You cheat, and then you go forward over to 12, to the jungle. And I always kind of think, though, that's a lot like working with data. You start down one path, and then you're like, oh, no. And you have to come back, and you have to think about like another data source or some other piece of information you just learned. And that kind of teaching our young junior professionals and our graduate students, et cetera, how to be comfortable with the idea that there's going to be all of these different paths, and then you need to document them. You need to make sure you're writing down why you've made all of these decisions. Is key to working with data, because of course you do not want to be trapped in the cave forever. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of examples of some work that's being done at Carnegie Mellon. I'm very happy to answer more detailed questions about all of this, not only in the Q&A, but also in the networking session after the plenaries. And one of them is related to modeling pandemics. So as of course we all know, we've just lived through one, continuing at the moment. But epidemiological forecasting is crucial for public health officials, pharmaceutical companies, social services, and the general public. So what we're really thinking about is like how to manage resources, but also how to get people to make decisions using real, accurate data. That is incredibly difficult. And a lot of this is focused on public awareness. This can be campaigns or advertising. And we can do all kinds of fancy data curation and data management, but at the end of the day, if it's not in a form that people can use and understand, it's not going to be as effective. So I'm showing you a few slides from the Carnegie Mellon Delphi group. You can just Google CMU Delphi to get it. This is a multidisciplinary group that's based in statistics and data science and machine learning at CMU. It's with universities all over the country. We also work with lots of different, so we work with the CDC, of course, but we also work with lots of healthcare companies, and we also are partners with Facebook and Google to do some crowdsourcing. So the reason that we started being so successful in doing epidemiological forecasting is that if everyone just thinks about flu rates for a second, like what kind of data sets you might use to predict flu, all right? So you get data sets from hospitals, maybe flu shots that are given, the CDC sends things. Well, it turns out that you can improve all of those predictions and that you can proxy data you don't have by untraditional sources, crowdsourcing. You just look at, for example, how often do people Google things about flu? So that's not a data source from a healthcare system, but it's a data source that people are generating, right? By talking about flu, tweeting about flu. If you want to deal with terrible data, I'm sure some of you deal with tweets. It is awful. The spelling in this country is going way downhill. All right. Hashtag spell, learn to spell. Okay. All right. So when COVID started, the CDC asked us to turn to COVID-19, of course. And so we've been working on this for for the entire time, 2.5, 3 years. We get information about doctor visits, but we also do surveys. We get over 100,000 survey responses every single day from Facebook. We get feeds of data from Google. We get insurance claim data from a few healthcare companies. We ask questions like, are people wearing masks around you? How are you feeling? What do your neighbors look like? How are they doing? Is everybody getting vaccines? And this kind of crowdsourced information were data sets that didn't exist before, but when we combine those with the more official data sets from the healthcare system, we get an incredible picture of what COVID-19 looks like at a very fine-grained level in the United States. So there's some like standard models happening under the hood. Happy to answer questions about that. But the most difficult part, as I'm sure many of you will relate to, is building and integrating the data streams. Turns out we're not so good at these records across the states. And at the county and city level, it's even worse. The variation's unbelievable. And we also have issues with what gets reported and when, and like what are we missing and where should we go get it. So we've had a group of students, we've had students working on this continuously for 3 years. And I'll never forget, early on, one of the student groups came running up to me and they're like, we got it. We've cracked COVID. And I'm like, well, that's amazing because you're 19, but let's do it. Like, tell me now. And they're like, everyone gets COVID on Monday. So we just shut down Monday and we're good. And I just thought, God, if it were only that simple, what are you talking about? And it turned out that there were a few counties in a few states where there were these incredible COVID spikes on Monday. And their thought was that, that everybody's getting back to work, right, et cetera, and then that they all get COVID because they didn't understand about the reporting process, right? Like how long it would take to turn this stuff around. So when we talk to domain experts, of course, what we learned is there are some counties that don't have the resources to continuously monitor over 7 days. And so Monday and Tuesday, we're getting all the COVID from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right? So simple things like this, right, that you have to adjust for when you're working on all of your analyses. The other thing, of course, that you can imagine is that working with data and real people, it's pretty complicated. People do not care if we ask them questions about flu. People have pretty strong opinions when you ask them questions about COVID. So we had to think about how to design surveys and how to collect information in such a way that we're capturing things as useful as possible. So what I'm flashing through here I'm just, because we can't switch out I can't go to the website live. So I'm just showing you a few screenshots of different kinds of interactive visualizations that exist on this site. You can download all of the data sets. You can download the code that goes into the feeds. But if you know nothing technical at all, you can still click on these things and see what's happening in your area. And that's what's key. We have technical things and we have incredibly non-technical things. And the non-technical things are used far more often, right? We go on NPR, we go do morning news shows, we go to town halls, and we use these non-technical displays of information in order to help people understand the world around them. We also have a lot of people working on data stories, writing blogs, shooting out small stories, quick little chunks of information that can be written for the general public. Every team should have somebody doing that. That's incredibly valuable. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. This is another example of COVID. You're welcome to look. And I would like to finish really briefly with another project that we have that's thinking about how people look at data. So this is that research, the science of data science. So we have a platform at Carnegie Mellon called the Integrated Statistics Learning Environment, where we can turn all of you loose, for example, on a data set. You can all collaborate, think like Google Docs, but for data analysis. It tracks everything that everyone's doing. We can look at action logs. We can see who's writing, who's doing the t-tests, who's making videos, who's scraping data. And what we do is we try to analyze what's the best way to work with data. What's the most optimal way? And we do all kinds of things like, this is a Sunburst Plot, looking at sequences of decisions that people make. So if you see the light red sections on the right of that sunburst, that's once they did a hypothesis test, they ran a hypothesis test again, they ran a hypothesis test again. These are students. Does anybody in the room know what they're doing? They're p hacking, yeah, but we bust them. That's the important thing, all right? So the point is that we can watch sequences of actions and we can better understand how people make decisions with their data. We also look at when they write, when they analyze, how they pull reports together, what's the best way that they present things. We see when people are working at 3 o'clock in the morning, when everything's due at 8 a.m., so that's unfortunate. And we see which people like start, very early, and what's the best way to put together an entire data analysis or entire data science workflow. We can also compare different kinds of actions, and we can look at what kinds of, and we do analyses on what they write and what kinds of graphs they do. So what kinds of words they talk about, what topic they're focusing on, what trends. And you can imagine the richness of this data set that is constantly created. We have thousands of people on this platform all the time. And what we've really discovered is that everyone thinks about data slightly differently. It doesn't matter. I have hundreds of statistics and machine learning majors, and I have English majors on the same platform, and they both do really lovely things with data, but they think about it completely differently. And that's really important to consider when you are trying to broaden data for all people, or different perspectives that people have, and the way they look at graphs and the decisions that they make. We're seeing this more and more in research. Those early decisions will change the final results that you get. So making sure that you understand the different perspectives will help with expanding the influence of data. The other thing that it will help with is expanding our data science talent acquisition pipeline. The more that we replace barriers in front of people, you need to learn these 4 programming languages, you need to learn these 9 tools, the more we're blocking out sections of our population from entering something that's related to data. So trying to think very broadly about what does our entire population look like? What is their backgrounds? Let's design tools and techniques and tricks to meet people where they are and help them come toward data versus having very high technical barriers that are going to lock out a good chunk of our population. We see that quite frequently as well. And I would challenge everyone to be thinking, when you're doing data for all people, you should be thinking all the way down into the K-12 space. This is a massive thing in education right now. My 9.5-year-old, when she was in kindergarten, she was making bar charts out of gummy bears, eating the gummy bears. It's like the best data science ever. I've never had a yummier data science project, right, than what she had. But be thinking that way. How could you, if you think about the general education level of the entire United States and the globe, we need to be creating products that will help meet people where they are and then help lift them. Yeah, that's what we need to be doing. So our goal is to empower everyone on data-informed decision-making, not data-driven, We're not going to be replacing people with robots. We're going to combine the power of people and data. We're going to put that together and help empower people to use data to make decisions about their lives. And I really appreciate your time. I know that was short and fast, and I'm super happy to answer any questions. And I hope you have a wonderful Esip meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Is this working? It's mic 2. Right. Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it. So, speaking of democratizing data, we're going to try and democratize Q&A. So for those of you online and those of you in the room, you can use the Slido app. So I hope to see everybody pull out your phones. Yes, I'm encouraging you to pull out your cell phones. And what you do is you type your questions into the app, and then it's really cool because if you see a question you like and you're like, yeah, I want, ask that one, you vote it up, and it'll rise to the top of the list there. So we're training you here in this opening plenary about using Slido because this really allows us to connect with the people that are out in the online world, and that's a really important component of this, right? We're really excited to have such a full room, but we want to make sure folks online can have their voices heard as well. Question? Yeah. So if you go to slido.com, it will ask you to put in, there'll be a little space to put in a code, put in pound Esip, and that should take you right to the site, all right? So we'll go with the first question. How do you teach your students to listen to decision makers when designing their work projects?
That is a really good question because they are pretty bad at that at the beginning. So one of the things we do with the experiential learning program is so I'll just base it on semester, for example. So we have about 15 weeks in a semester, about 14, 15 weeks. And we spend the first few weeks of them just meeting the partner and talking through the problem before they're ever given any data sets. And we kind of force them to learn how to interview, so to speak, the partner and make sure that they're really understanding the point of doing the project. So many of the students just really want to be handed the data set and they just want to start coding. But we also then do a little bit of trial by fire where they're often presenting to the external partner, sometimes as often as weekly. Every 2 weeks is more common, but sometimes as often as weekly. And we'll have students put together slides in the first time where they're showing, here's the results of all of my random forest, and they're presenting everything. And it's not occurred to them one time that their external partner has no idea what a random forest is, right? And then we make them kind of start over and like re-practice and then ask the external partner, is this helpful for you? Does this help you make a decision, et cetera? So some of it is done a lot through experience. And they do get burned. They do get burned in the beginning, but I think it's good. I'd rather have them burned while they're in the program, right? And then come out and really help you. So we really push communication hard and push a lot of getting your feet wet and getting in the game. And we really appreciate the support of the external partners on that. They very often understand this is an educational experience. And so the students aren't very good in the beginning, but they are really good at the end. And so we appreciate the partners like kind of going along that journey with us there.
Excellent. I love seeing all the questions popping in here and
this is
the
great.
votes. This is awesome.
I haven't used this before. This is pretty cool.
Yeah. So where do data providers fit into the 6 roles you discussed? I think we have a few data providers in the room.
Yeah, so I guess I might ask, if there's a common definition for data provider within the Esip community, like is there a common term there? Because I might think of it as.
Does anyone want to offer a definition? I can run.
I mean, I have what I'm thinking, but I want to make sure I'm reflecting your terminology.
So just so folks online can hear, a researcher who generates data made in their lab. Sorry.
So so a research expert who's generating data as part of their lab or but they're not necessarily the ones doing the analysis? Is that maybe a good example? Okay.
Maybe they're an instrument designer or an algorithm.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I would put those under, in the picture that I had up there, we, in our conversations with the national academies, we would probably put those under domain experts. But the domain experts are then working with, for example, data engineers maybe to capture some of that data, or they're collecting data. I mean, we just finished a project this past spring with a gentleman in Costa Rica who was studying the migration pattern of bats. And this was like the coolest ever. But they really just went out every day into the jungles of Costa Rica and wrote down what was happening, right? So that's the domain expert. And then we had to take those data sources, which were like pieces of paper and Excel spreadsheets, and kind of turn them into a data feed, right? A pipeline that could go into kind of a dashboard for him. So I would, those domain experts though, those researchers that you just described are crucial, and we are not getting our data scientists and engineers to talk to them enough. I think that I've worked on so many projects where the data have been entirely generated, the study's already going, and they don't even bring us in until they hand us the data. And they say, find something, right? Like, and then we say, okay, and then, but it's bad for both groups, right? We want the conversations to start extremely early. It's more work in the beginning, but the projects move faster and the results are better. So we put more work up front and communicate and collaborate, and then we end later, yeah, in a better place.
All right, so we have time for one more question,
Yeah,
but
sure.
It sounds like Rebecca's going to be able to stay with us through the coffee break. So hopefully you can catch her to continue the conversation there. So from Monica Youngman from NOAA, are there lessons for how people use data that can be used to improve data accessibility and usable for data repositories? We definitely have data repositories in the room.
That's a great question. So I would say from the education standpoint, in academia and education, our early repositories were really just people throwing data sets somewhere, right? And there was kind of no metadata associated with it, no tags, no telling us what the data are good for, no telling us like, should we use this for a regression problem? Is this like, is this a good example of experimental design, et cetera? But we also kind of had this big assumption in those early years of the repositories that if you put things online, then you have solved the equity problem, right? Like we have made it available and it's free, but we didn't put together enough best practices on how to teach people how to use the repository, or what metadata or things should be accompanying those data sets in order to help people use it. We just put the data set up and didn't put any like example analyses, maybe different kinds of code, maybe putting it up in a platform that you don't have to code to use the data. So we didn't think very much about the like range of ways that people would use the data sets. We just kind of threw them up there. So I think now what I'm seeing a lot more of, and what we're also trying to participate in at Carnegie Mellon, is building far more interactive repositories. That's a 12-year-old out in Montana in a small town who doesn't have like a university nearby or something, can see it, get really excited about it and start looking, and maybe they have good wireless, maybe they don't. That's another accessibility issue. We need products that can be downloaded when wireless starts to fail. We saw this when we went remote in the pandemic, right? But going from that all the way through the most technical people who want the API feeds, who want the more technical infrastructure. So designing for everybody is crucial, right? It's just, of course, it's more work, but the impact's unreal. When you see all the different people using it and how they're using it is so cool. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca. Let's give Rebecca a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your participation and your comments and questions. Happy to stick around. And again, welcome to Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Rebecca. With that, it's my pleasure to turn the stage over to Amin and have him take it away for us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I want to start off by saying, thanking Susan for inviting me to engage with you guys today. And I'll be around all day. It's really some fun sessions, and so look forward to even more intimate engagement. And then also thank you to Megan. She's been amazing in sort of getting me here and staying on top of me and my non-responsiveness to emails. Thank you, Rebecca. That was a great talk. Unfortunately, I'm going to turn the volume down just a little bit with what I'm going to talk about. And so what I want to do is first sort of share a little bit about myself. I don't get too many opportunities to engage such an impressive group of scientists. So I do have to sort of share my bona fides here. So started my career way back when I was an engineer at Motorola, back when Motorola was an actual engineering company and not like this weird brand or whatever it is now. And then I moved to academia, and I call myself a recovering academic. And I was at Johns Hopkins, and I guess NASA is in the house, and some of you are familiar with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. So I did about 8 years or so at the Applied Physics Lab. Then I left and went to the White House. I was a White House fellow, and then I worked at OSTP doing hiring policy, because when you have a PhD in engineering, that's what they ask you to do when you go to the White House, is hiring policy. And then I became the CTO at OPM, which is decidedly a non-technical federal agency. But then thankfully from there, I was the chief analytics officer for New York City for about 4 or 5 years or so, and sort of ran the mayor's office for data and analytics in New York, and worked with some amazing teammates doing data science in New York. And then from there, spent a couple of really great years. One of my favorite companies, Esri, I see they're a sponsor, spent 2 years as the head of urban analytics there, and then went on to WRI, World Resources Institute, and was the global director of the data lab there. Created, the CEO of WRI, Andrew Steer, was announced as the CEO of Bezos Earth Fund, which, by the way, I have a bunch of slides. There's 2 things that I don't like to do, and that is wear a tie and speak to slides. So I'm sort of just riffing. And I'll pipe through the slides, and I think you'll have them. And I initially turned down the offer because this is summer of 2021, and I, formerly being the chief analytics officer for New York City, I was really struggling through what was happening in our cities with the pandemic. And I had volunteered a lot of my time in New York. I live in Baltimore now, so I was volunteering my time in Baltimore and doing a lot of stuff with data, because there were a lot of challenges cities were having with data, and folks were reaching out. So I jumped in, and so I was really trying to figure out a lot of things at that time. And so, well, if you came on board, you could do whatever you wanted, right? We want to fund some really impactful work through the Bezos Earth Fund. And I'm just going to go to the next slide, right? So that's the Bezos Earth Fund, is a $10 billion commitment, so on and so forth. So I really want to take 5 minutes to frame the rest of these sort of fancy slides that I have. I truly believe, and this is the case, and has been the case for a while, that there is a great chasm between scientists and the work that scientists do and community. And we saw it play out many different ways. We saw it in the pandemic, because when it hit February, March of 2020, only until the soonest was like June, July 2020, did you start hearing conversations around like, oh crap, like this is hitting certain communities and certain people in a way more intense way than other communities. And so the reason why it took so long is because we just don't have information, and we weren't doing data science and analysis on data from these communities, right? Why? Oftentimes, and I saw this a lot in my time in New York City, is that communities don't like to share information about themselves. Why? Because communities, shocker to some of you government folks, communities don't trust government. I used to always say in New York, when I was the chief analytics officer, I used to say, you know, people will put all sorts of crap onto Facebook, and literally at the end of the year, Facebook will send you a video that literally starts off with, we know exactly what you did all year, and like give you this slideshow of your life for the year. But as soon as my office would announce that we're using some sort of building data to do some analysis, right, people would be up in arms, period. And so we don't trust government with our data. Why is that? There is a lot of reasons, a lot of reasons. One of the reasons why underserved communities don't trust, anybody here familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment? Right? It ended in 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and let's go back to the pandemic. Why didn't CDC have all of this information about communities the way they wanted? Because CDC and United States Public Health Service did an experiment where they tested 400 African Americans because they wanted to see, and they injected them with syphilis and wanted to see how they would react to syphilis if it wasn't treated. But they didn't tell these African Americans, and over 100 of them died. This ended in 1972, which is not that far long ago, right? So think about communities and how they think about government and how government uses their data and what government does with their data. And I ran into this almost every day in New York City. That trust just isn't there. And so how do we, the work that I wanted to do and am doing at the Bezos Earth Fund is how do we shift that paradigm, right? To who are the data experts? I have this analogy in my head that I function from, and I remember I started thinking about this during my time in New York City, and I remember sharing with my team before a presentation. I was like, should I discuss this analogy? And they were like, no, it just doesn't make any sense, but I think I've perfected it, and I'm gonna share it with this group, which is, and this is the core of this conversation in these slides that I'm gonna buzz through for you. So I think about it, I'm a big foodie. I'm going to there's a sushi restaurant, Jin. It's an amazing sushi spot here in Pittsburgh. So when I knew I was coming to Pittsburgh, I looked at all of the food spots. I think about food all the time, all the time. So think about farmland, right? And think about all of the fresh produce that's being created and developed on farmland across the United States, across the world. Really high quality stuff. That's your data, right? Think about this. What if someone said to you, you know, we've got this amazing, plentiful, access to all of this produce on farmlands, but the only people that can cook with this is if you graduated from Le Cordon Bleu or Culinary Institute of America. So only two types of people, and maybe another 10 top culinary institutes. That's it. No one else can use this high quality produce. You guys remember Anthony Bourdain? Remember Anthony Bourdain used to have No Reservations show? I used to love watching that. Remember how Anthony Bourdain in No Reservations, he would do one like high, 5-star Michelin star restaurant, and then for the rest of the show, he would literally go to people's homes and rural spaces all over the globe and show that they actually were making better food oftentimes than some of these Michelin star restaurants. So if you did that, if you didn't allow certain people from certain communities to use this produce from this farmland, you wouldn't have what we celebrate now, which is such a diverse culinary experience. So many top Michelin star restaurants actually take from, you know, the mom and pops and the communities and the grandmothers in Senegal and the young women in Bahia or even in Mississippi who were building these amazing things from access to this stuff. That's your data science and AI environment today, right? There are people who get advanced degrees in machine learning and AI and data science and computer science. And then there's all of this really powerful and useful data, and there is a deep chasm between those two. So how do we, so I just set the stage, so how do we shift that chasm? So I won't read through these eye charts, but one of the initiatives at the Bezos Earth Fund is called the Environmental Impact Data Collaborative. The short of it is there's three things that are key to this Environmental Data Collaborative. It is impact projects. So we identify projects that we work on, that we want to work on. There are stakeholders, and that's stakeholders, academia, community members, nonprofits, community organizations, environmental justice groups, private sector entities. There's a bunch of stakeholders, and then there is a data infrastructure, right? And you can think about this data infrastructure the way you think about any run-of-the-mill open data platform, but we're creating it from the ground up with the stakeholders and the community members in mind. When I was the chief analytics officer in New York City, and even when I was in the federal, you know, I think at the time Socrata was a big open data platform. You know, Esri has an open data platform, and then there's CCAN and DCAN and all of those. And I remember I was talking to an open data vendor. I won't say their name. I was talking to an open data vendor. I was like, "Who's the user for this tool?" They were like, "Anyone can use it." And specifically in the space of open data and any platform, when everyone is a user, that means no one is a user, right? And so this is a targeted infrastructure that we're looking to build. So our theory of change is exactly what I talked to you about. Our theory of change for this effort basically says two things. One is that we believe that hyperlocal data, community-focused data, and data from the community is going to shift how we provide answers and capability in the environmental space. The way you want to think about it is we're reversing, I think, Microsoft Planetary Computer Initiative and Amazon Sustainable Data Initiative, right? Like, these are really impressive and powerful initiatives. And what do they say? They're saying, hey, NASA, NOAA, you guys, and all over the place, there's all of these remote sensing data sets that are big and cumbersome and clunky, and a lot of scientists and a lot of people, you know, may not have access to and abilities to download and do analysis because these are just really gigantic data sets. We are reversing that. We're saying there's all of this data in the community that people just don't know how to surface and source. And so we're building a data collaborative, which means people, data, and context. It's not a platform. We have to have a physical platform, and so we want to create a platform. But we're talking about data, people, and context is what comes to the table. And so the other piece is that we don't and we can't be extractive about the data. Far too often, so now go back to my food analogy, because I love talking about food. And imagine these farmlands, the indigenous people of this country are the people who run the farmlands. Now imagine people from Culinary Institute saying, hey, listen, you really don't know what to do with this. You really won't take advantage of this. I'll take it off your hands. The people in the community are like, go ahead, have it. You're right. Like, we're just gonna have a nice meal and I'm gonna feed my kids, but take the data. And then there's no relationship between the two. It's a very extractive process. So now if we're talking about going to these communities and getting data to do analysis and so on and so forth, how do we create an infrastructure where those people who are offering their own personal information? Two things. They remain in ownership. Ownership doesn't shift. They remain in ownership. There's a governance process in place by their community to manage that data, and then they get compensated if at any point that data is used to create resources and a financial gain for anyone using that data. It doesn't exist anywhere, and so we wanted to take some resources to drive that, specifically around a particular project. Now, I literally cannot, I didn't realize I wasn't going to see the text on these, but I think this slide is talking about, we wanted to create this open source building, because in order to green buildings, we needed to, oh, there we go, thank you so much. An open source building and energy model data set and recommendation engine for 100 million plus buildings across the United States, right? That any and everyone can use to understand, analyze, and highlight buildings in need of energy efficiency, clean tech interventions. Now, the key here is that we know that we have to source data from communities, especially if we want to target environmental justice communities, climate justice communities, underserved communities, rural communities. We need to be able to source data from these communities. And so part of the effort is actually thinking through, there are federal agencies, there are organizations who have data about buildings, there are even cities that have data about buildings, but then we want to get data from the people who were there in the buildings, put sensors and so on and so forth into these buildings, track the heat, air quality, building quality, so on and so forth. So I'm going to skip past this. This is the data infrastructure that I talked about. So Bezos Earth Fund funded Georgetown University Massive Data Institute to build out this infrastructure. You guys can take a look at this. You'll get the slides. You can take a look at this. But this is a slide that they put together that kind of shows the key working strategy of this. Now, this is important. These are the environmental impact data collaborative partners for this sort of proof of concept effort. Morgan State, anybody familiar with Morgan State? That's not awesome. Morgan State is what's known as a HBCU, a historically Black college or university. It's based in Baltimore. Howard University is a historically Black college or university based in Washington, D.C. Part of this effort was that we didn't go to just the same olds. Now we have to partner with the folks. This is a legacy thing, right? So we got to partner with the Georgetowns and the MITs. Why? Because over time, they have all of the resources and all of the capability. So we want this to be successful. So we bring some of these folks, but we also, as a cornerstone and a key capability of this effort, we bring in the HBCUs. Since many didn't raise it, HBCUs, minority serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, the most interesting thing about those type of universities are that they are in the communities that they look to serve, right? And so it's important to bring them along because these are the communities that we're looking to engage, right? And so we want to work with the universities that are in these communities. Anybody familiar with Inrupt? Anybody familiar with Tim Berners-Lee? Right. That's interesting. When I asked Inrupt, nobody raised their hand. When I asked Tim Berners-Lee, I'm sure everyone knows who Tim Berners-Lee is. No one raised their hand either. So I guess it's not a hand raising. I guess if I ask, like, who gives a crap? Everybody raised their hand, right? So Tim Berners-Lee partnered with MIT to create this technology. It's open source technology called Solid. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. You can Google it and so on and so forth. But the idea was that Tim Berners-Lee had this burning concern about the web that he had created, which put data in the hands of Facebook, Amazon, Google, and like maybe 10 or 15 other folks. And then that's it. It's just centralized there. They use it to monetize it and so on and so forth. He's like, that's not the web that I wanted, right? So he created this technology called Solid, which basically says, you can have your personal pod, right? And you put your data in that personal pod, and anyone that wants to use it has to get access to it through you. So if Facebook wants to use your pictures, the pictures are in your pod, they have to ask you for your permission, and you can grant and take away access as you see fit over time. And it can be at a highly granular level. So if we're talking about tabular data, we can actually speak, you can just make certain columns of your data set available and so on and so forth, right? So it's back to personal ownership and stewardship of data. So Inrupt, so he invented that at MIT. He started a company called Inrupt, which he's the CTO of, and they're essentially going around the world and deploying these. And then we wanted to work with the city of Baltimore, their chief data officer, and others in Baltimore to actually execute this proof of concept. How much time do I have? Awesome. All right. So essentially, the majority of GHG emission coming from buildings, so that's why we wanted to tackle this from a building perspective. This is the ecosystem. I talked about this. There are data contributors, city governments, technology partners like Inrupt and others, and then community relationships and so on and so forth. This is what the platform looks like. So we can talk, maybe somebody asks a question, I'll explain this a little bit more or whatever the case may be, but what you're seeing, let me explain it in real world terms. Remember earlier I talked about trust, that chasm between work that's being done about the community, supposedly for the community, and the community. What you're looking at now is, and then also a key word that exists in there is trust. How do you surface data from the community while engendering and building trust? So when we looked at the city of Baltimore, and when you look at most communities here in Pittsburgh, Baltimore, New York, DC, doesn't matter. There are places of trust that people from the community tend to trust more than the government, right? And so think about Baltimore, a majority African-American city. Anybody just yell out, what's like a place of trust that people in the community by default would tend to trust in this African-American community? Church, exactly, churches. Sometimes barbershops, community colleges, rec centers. There's a lot of places that engender a level of trust that they've built over time. And so what we did was we worked with the city to deploy, the pods in those trusted spaces. So we're not asking individuals to manage their own data because you're going to have wavering levels of technology capability, but we put a pod in one of these centers of trust and then build a human governance model around that to say, okay, this is the data that's coming in, then anyone that wants this data about our community has to come through this actual real governance board, 4 or 5 or so people from the community. And that's what that is, and it pushes it to that unified data platform, which is what Georgetown Massive Data Institute is building for us. And then you can see where you can now have any level of public portals and then user access. So this slide is what, I'm gonna end off with this slide. This is what Howard University, so they're doing the same thing. So Morgan State is doing this in Baltimore, and Howard University is working with us to do this in Washington, DC. And we're actually gonna roll out to a number of cities, and even, quite frankly, quite possibly in some international cities as well. So I like this slide because this shows the technical view of what we're actually doing. So if you start from the sensors, so what they're doing is going into homes and deploying these sensors into homes. So we're getting permission from the people in the community to deploy these sensors, air quality and temperature sensors in people's homes. We're getting their permission, and then they're pumping that into an actual sort of cloud infrastructure. And then that moves over to the right, you see where, and then there's also community participants who are getting apps, and they can share information about their surroundings and their environment and their community. Then it goes into that pod that sits at this trusted place in the community that has a community governance model to it. And then and only then you see the EIDC agent if we're given access to any of that data. So think about what I'm telling you. I'm not telling you we're going in and getting data from the community. I'm telling you we're standing up a platform that the community can put the data in for themselves and manage it themselves. Then we go and ask permission and get actual access to that through them. It's a completely different model. Even scientists, I mean, like there's MOUs and, all sorts of board processes and so on and so forth. But that type of, it's your data and we're surfacing it. We're working with you to surface that data, but it's yours. It never, under no circumstance, becomes ours, right? We're just asking you to have access to it when you can give it to us. And then we build it out and we add it to the EIDC data, again, is the Georgetown Massive Data Institute platform. And then that's where we make it accessible to any and everyone nationally and internationally. So it's a fit. The only way I was accepted the role to come on and work with the Basal Source Fund was I told them I had to do something like this. And they were like, oh, right. Yeah, knock yourself out, sure. But we're having a ball doing it and it's non-trivial. And so the last slide is like, listen, there are things that we absolutely want to continue to grow this partnership. The one good thing about the Basal Source Fund is that there's no shortage of resources and people wanting to come to the table. And so part of me being here is engaging this community for help as well, where insight and help can be gained. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amin. I love an Esip plenary that ends with a help wanted slide. I mean, that just is like perfect because that's what this community loves to do and we love to work together on things. So bust out your Slido app online and in the room. I'm sure that you guys have plenty of questions. We'll start off with the first one by Renee Sieber. Many policymakers believe trustworthy AI will solve public acceptance. How do you get them to understand some communities have legit reasons to distrust AI?
Yeah. All right, so let's unpack that statement for a second. I really like that, Renee. First of all, please point me to a, if I now that I don't work in government anymore, I can say stuff like this. Point me to a policymaker that truly understands AI. All right? So what they believe and what they understand, let's put that in its own bucket. I think that, sorry, I was looking for the slide, the question, it just went away. But I think the key here is that we can no longer, and I talked about that chasm, we can no longer create these terms like smart city, big data, trustworthy AI, all of it, deep learning, all of these terms, and then it's on this community to understand those terms, right? We need to start creating vernacular and conversations starting from the community. You notice that's how that always happens is IBM invents the term smart city, and then now it's on city officials to explain to people in the community what a smart city is. And they're like, I've been driving cabs here for 20 years. Literally, I had a conversation. I was in Birmingham, Alabama, going to a smart city conference, and the cab driver was like, what's a smart city? Because I've been driving cabs here forever, and if you're saying that a smart city means everyone in Birmingham is smart, I beg to differ, right? Like, so we have to create these this conversation starting from the community rather than trying to explain these terms that we invent to the community.
Excellent. Let's see if we can get those questions up again, because it's like a mystery. I don't know what's going to be at the top. Oh, all right, 12 votes. How did you explain data pods to regular folks in Baltimore?
Yeah, so it's got to be, for us, it was a process. So the first challenge was having this conversation with Morgan State, right? And so you think about the way that we went. By the way, I'm an alum of Morgan State. I'm also an alum of Howard University. all of my degrees were at HBCUs because I just felt like that was, at any rate, we had to introduce the technology to Morgan State. But here's what's key, right? So Morgan State has like a handful of faculties and like 8 to 10 undergrad students working on this project. Like I said before, those 8 to 10 undergrad students, where do you think they live? Where do you think they're from? Baltimore, in those neighborhoods that we're looking to engage. So part of it wasn't, we needed to do this big campaign. We started with Morgan State, then we went to the city, and we engaged there, and then we're funding data fellows in the city of Baltimore and in Washington, D.C. And so that's how the conversation, that's the strategy for the conversation. My brain would explode if I was in like West Baltimore trying to explain this to someone. But if you talk to the right representatives of that community, the Morgan State, the city, and hiring these data fellows from the community, training them up to go out, I think where we're to just, part of the conversation is working with the churches and those organizations, and we've been training, there's a training process and protocol that we've put in place to train those communities and let them engage the community again, because I don't know that they care about the Bezos Earth Fund or trust the Bezos Earth Fund, but I do know they trust that church. And that's the conversation, that's the strategy. I do know they trust Morgan State, because Morgan State has been educating these young kids from Baltimore for decades upon decades.
Excellent. Sarah Lafia, one of our Esip fellows, I love that you went with the theme here. So what steps are needed to, quote, cook and serve data? Do communities want raw data, recipes, etc.? And what role do data repositories play in that supply chain?
Sarah, you guys got an impressive fellow, that's for sure. That's the $1 million question, right? I'm going to answer that question because I love telling stories. I'm going to answer that question with a story from Baltimore. Mayor Catherine Pugh, which is one of the far too many mayors in Baltimore who went to jail, and she, at the time, there's this YouTube of her standing next to her police commissioner who also got fired for craziness. At any rate, they had been working with some company, I think it was Palantir or some other company, to do predictive policing in New York City. And so they had this big conversation with this press availability conversation around the work. And so we're gonna do predictive policing, we're gonna stop all of the crime, it's gonna be amazing, predictive policing is the new way, and the police commissioner was like, yeah, this is amazing, predictive policing. And then invariably, you know what happened, right? Someone from some journalist from the audience was like, yeah, is this like Minority Report, right? And then the police commissioner jumps in, he's like, no. We're gonna make this code available to the community. We're gonna open this code to the community. It's gonna be made available, so it's gonna be open and transparent. Who in the hell in Baltimore, East and West Baltimore, they call them the kidneys. I don't know if any of you've seen The Wire, the kidneys, East and West Baltimore. Point to me someone that's gonna wake up one morning and go to GitHub and start rooting through predictive policing code, Python or otherwise. What he meant was we're gonna make it available to Johns Hopkins students. That's it, right? And so that question is really powerful in that that's such a complex thing to think through, because there has to be capacity building. And so we're actually funding Massive Data Institute and other entities to do capacity building in the community. So you do want to recognize that historically, these sorts of things haven't been taught. And so we do want to do capacity building. Then you do also want to create, and this is part of what Georgetown is doing, is we have multiple convenings all the time, and we're bringing people to the table and say, do you asking simple questions in your day-to-day at your nonprofit, do you use data? Okay, you do. Do you find it challenging in any way? where has it been helpful? We have these conversations and we have these convenings. So we spend more resources on bringing people together like this and having these conversations and talking to folks, because that's going to be the biggest challenge, is identifying the who and the how and the when in these communities. It is not, if it was easy, it'd have been done by now. So definitely $1 million question. The answer is I don't know what steps. We've got a little bit of money, thanks to Bezos, and we're jumping in. It's better than not doing it, right?
I just had one person wanted to make a little correction on that, the vendor for the policing, sorry.
Hi, I'm with Palantir, Carmen Jenkins.
Oh, okay,
But
so it wasn't Palantir.
That was not Palantir,
That
that
wasn't
was
Palantir.
persistent surveillance system, so just want to
Got
set
you.
the record straight on that.
Okay.
Yes, we keep each other honest around here. No worries. All right, so I think
Listen, I got some Palantir stories. We used Palantir in New York City. My office literally had Palantir Data Bridge, so I got Palantir stories for days. Anyway.
it's all good. So I think we have time for one last question for Amin, and I'm going to go with our next highest one up. Where can we find out more about the project to collaborate with Indigenous communities on their data governance to assure that community retains ownership?
Yeah, so if you're asking me how we're making, we had a convening in Washington, D.C. at Open Forum to think through all of the different ways, because I think, Rebecca, you made a great point earlier around, like, you just don't put stuff in an open data portal and then like declare it's open, right? And so we want to be targeted and thoughtful around making this stuff available. So, and we also want to prioritize a certain community over others. Oftentimes, journalists and scientists and academics are prioritized in terms of making these things open and available. And so we do have a targeted community and audience that we're looking to make it open to. And so we're thinking strategically about that. But shortly, and we'll be in touch with Esip and engage with Esip. And as we make this open and available in a big way, everyone will be involved. There are data, we're making data sets available through many different, because we acknowledge that there's already tons of platforms where data can be made available and so on and so forth. And so we are making data sets available. We haven't published this work. As you can imagine, there are tons of things that we want to get right before there's a whole IRB process on a lot of this data and so on and so forth.
Excellent. So I think you guys can imagine, as Amin and I started to have some conversations, I was like, wow, I think that this is the start of a relationship, right? And I want to connect us with them and them with us. And I think there's a lot, a lot of the things he mentioned, I know that we've got 2 open science sessions coming up this afternoon. There's just a lot of really great synergies. So can I get a big round of applause for Amin for coming to join us? Excellent. So thank you, everybody. This room, if you're online, I just got to tell you, we are missing you here in person, but to look out and see, like, there's hardly any empty chairs, but we still have space. I just love seeing all of you in this room, and I'm really excited for the next 4 days. So it is now almost 10 o'clock. We have a 1-hour coffee break. You can take a coffee break online too. And then we have, I don't know about you, but I filled out my Sketch. If you use the Sketch app, it will help you, figure out which sessions you want to go to, where you want to be. I encourage you to use the app. But I know mine, I've selected at least 2 sessions for each section of time, so that's going to be fun and tricky. But really enjoy those sessions this afternoon. And then for those of you in person, we really look forward to our opening reception this evening. Really great time to mix and mingle and get to meet new people and reconnect with old. So thank you all for being here, and let's have a great day.